everyone. Good day to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be one of your resource speakers for your media in service training. When I received the invitation last week, I'm really excited to be able to share to you some insights, knowledge, and ideas on this topic. I know this when I read the topic that you requested me to share to you, or the topic that I have read in your invitation, I immediately thought about the use of uh, online survey platforms in creating your online surveys. And I also saw that the topic before me was about creating researches. And so I decided to deliver my topic, making online surveys in the context of the research, so that you will have a smooth transition from the topic that you had on research to my topic right now. Okay, so my topic this today is on making online surveys. So I think it's very understandable, and I am Roxanne H. Fuentes. I'm currently working in the division office as EPS2 for monitoring and evaluation, under the Schools Governance Operations Division of the division office. Okay, so let me begin right away. Again, I will be talking about creating online surveys in this, what do you call this, recorded tutorial. But I will be focusing more in the context of research, because as you all know, online surveys serve a lot of purpose, and one of which is really on the context of when you create your action researches or basic researches. What is basically online survey? What I like about online surveys, because you can have a wider reach of respondents to your research. So a couple of months ago, let me share you my experience. A couple of months ago, I did a basic research on one of the researches I previously created a few years ago. But at that time, few years ago, at that time, I was only able to get participants within the division. Okay, I was able to get respondents within the division, teachers from this division. And when the pandemic happened and we were on quarantine, we were on lockdown, I was thinking of doing the same basic research but on a wider context. And what I did is I used an online survey form. Use an online form and send it to my friends who are in the various parts of the country. So in just one click, in just one link, and in just one share of this link, I was able to get respondents from all over the country, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And not only that, if you want international respondents, if you want respondents from other countries, you can also do that by using an online survey rather than uh, using a physical or hard copy of your questionnaire. So you'll get a wider reach of audience if you use online surveys for your researches. Okay, there are three ways to send online surveys, and I will give examples of this later. But there are three basic ways to send online surveys. One is through a link. Second one is through emails. If you already have the emails of your intended respondents or expected respondents. And the last is when you embed your survey into your website, say a school website or your classroom website or your teacher website or your school's social media page, or your class social media page. So with this it's very convenient, because you will not be spending. It's very cost effective, because all you have to do is generate the link and share the survey online. Okay, so those are the three basic ways to send online surveys. What are some uses of online surveys in the context of research? Again, there are a lot of uses of online surveys, online forms. But basically, if you would categorize all these uses, you will get three basic categories. First is you will get by using online surveys, uh, you will get feedback, right? You will get feedback for your services, for the strategies that you do, for the way you deliver your services. In school, you'll get feedback from parents. You'll be able to give feedback from parents. You'll be able to get feedback from students and even from your co-teachers, your stakeholders, and your colleagues. What's nice if you're aside from giving physical or hard copies of questionnaires. What's nice about online surveys is you still get to reach parents, stakeholders, and other persons involved in your school. You will still be able to reach them even if they cannot come physically to your school or if they're not around, right? So sometimes there are very busy parents, and but you can reach them through Facebook or other social media, and all you have to do is send the link, and still you get feedback from them even if they will not be able to come to school personally to talk to you about some concerns and etc. I did that actually to my parents before, especially for those who really cannot come to school regularly or most of the time because of their work. Okay, next is you can use online surveys to get comments. Same with feedback, but you can use online surveys to get comments, and it can be lengthy comments. So, for example, in Google Forms, there is a paragraph question wherein respondents or the one who will answer your survey would be able to uh, compose a paragraph, whatever comments that they will have in your online survey. So that's one of the uses, no, of online surveys. And then the third one is, of course, you by using online surveys you can track the performance, the progress of your student, your teacher, your even the performance of your school in general. So these are the basic uses of online surveys in the context of research and in the context of the schools. Next is when we talk about conducting surveys in schools, there are basically three purposes. First is we conduct survey in schools because we want to know teacher effectiveness. That's usually, di ba, in the university or in the private schools or even now in the public schools, we send out evaluation forms to students to evaluate teacher effectiveness. Now that we are experiencing pandemic and we're in quarantine, we can still do that, but now it becomes online. Okay, we can send online survey forms, evaluation forms to students so they can evaluate their teacher and teacher effectiveness even if they're not around. Okay, so you can send this to your parents, to the parents of your kids and your students as well. Second is we conduct surveys in school to know the attitudes of our kids, diba? What they want, what they need. Sometimes children are not really like expressive. They don't want to say what they want. Don't want to say what they need. But if you let them write, if you let them answer a survey about the things about themselves, they can easily answer and they can easily express themselves. So that's one of the purpose why we conduct surveys in school, to give a platform for students to voice out their opinions, their feedback, and it can also be done online, especially now that we're not meeting our students in a face-to-face traditional classroom setup. Okay? And lastly, of course, again, as I said earlier, the purpose of conducting services in the school is always about tracking the progress, the performance of our students, and we can do that by creating surveys and researches related to assessment, formative assessment, summative assessment, etc. And all of these, when we use surveys, or especially now online surveys, if we use surveys to gauge teacher effectiveness, to know the students' attitudes, wants, and needs, and their performance, it all boils down to the reason that we want to improve our systems and processes in schools. We we want to improve the teaching and learning process in schools. The reason why we're doing surveys, the reason why we're doing researches, the reason why we are asking students, teachers, stakeholders for their feedbacks, because we want to improve what we are offering. We want to improve our processes. We want to improve our systems. So that would always be our reason why we are conducting surveys, questionnaires, and researches in our schools. What is the characteristic of an online survey that is quite different with a physical survey? So first is number one, it's very cost effective. Diba? Unlike when you're doing a physical survey, you're printing out materials, you're spending on bond papers, you're spending on printing, and you're spending money for transportation when you go to the places where you would cascade the survey, the questionnaire. But in online, ano yung puhunan mo? It's just your time and effort. With just a link, you can share your survey to as many people as you want, right? In a day, in fact, going back to my example earlier, when I did the research um, last summer, I was able to get 200 participants, 200 respondents in a day with just one link alone. Diba? If I cannot get those 200 respondents in a day, right? It would take much time. It would take time and effort and money to get those 200 respondents to answer your survey or questionnaire. But in online surveys, you can do that in an hour or hours, or even in just a couple of minutes, probably, depending on how you shared the link, right? That's number one. That's very cost effective as compared to a printed survey. Second one is it's very convenient. When I did my research last summer, I was in the comfort of my home because we're on quarantine, we cannot go out. But I was still able to do research. There's no Because of online surveys, online forms, there's no more excuse that we cannot do research, because we can do it in the comfort of our homes by using online platforms such as Google Forms or Microsoft Forms. And lastly, as I said earlier, you can have a wider reach. So if you want to have a national level, regional level kind of research, you might want to opt for an online survey, an online questionnaire, online way of getting data, because it's much convenient, it's much easier, but you can easily get respondents from different parts of the country or of the community. So that is basically how online surveys are different to the physical or the traditional printed surveys. And then what's nice about online surveys is that you can access these surveys regardless of what gadget you're using, whether you're using cell phones or using tablets or even your laptops. It's very, very accessible. Okay. If you decided to do your action research and you have decided that you will gather data using an online survey or an online questionnaire, there are some things to consider before creating it. Okay. For one, you don't want to be editing your survey from time to time, because that would entail time and effort as well. So if you consider these things beforehand, the creation of your online surveys would be much easier. So what would you consider? There are a lot of things to consider in creating an online survey, but um, I will just uh, explain three because I really feel that this is what you need before you start creating your online forms. The first is you need to know your purpose. Regardless if it's a traditional printed survey or an online survey, it boils down to your purpose. What is the purpose of creating that survey? Is it to improve the process? Is it to know the feedback of our stakeholders? Is it to know the profile, what the profile of our learners are? Is it to know the opinion of the students? Because then, if you know the purpose of your online survey, you will then be able to create questions that are relevant to your purpose, right? You will no longer make questions that are not relevant to your purpose, which boils down to the structure. Once you define your purpose, you need to know the structure of your online survey. So later on, I will explain to you sectionings. For example, you want to structure it in a way like on the first part of the survey, you would want to know the profile of the respondents. What are the things that you would want to know? What are the things that you want to compare? Do you want to know the names? Do you want to require the names? Do you want to know their gender? Do you want to know their age? Do you want to know where they are working? Do you want to know their level of income? Something like that. You need to know that structure. Okay? In the context of research, you need to know what your independent and dependent variables are. But in the making of your questions on an online survey, it's basically structure. Okay? Because that's what you will do sectioning later on. So second part, what are the parts of the second part? What are the kind of questions that you are going to make? You need to determine that. You need to know that beforehand before you are going to make your online survey. Okay? So halimbawa, if you want to know from which school they are in, you will not make a multiple choice. Because if you are going to make a multiple choice and Google form, one page alone will not be enough for all the schools in Cagayan de Oro City. So might be the option would be a short answer wherein they will just type the school from which they are in, diba? So you need to determine the structure of your online survey. And lastly, you need to know who your respondents are, because this is where limits come in, and I will explain this further. But basically, you should know who your respondents are. For example, are you going to limit the respondents of your survey to public school teachers only, those with depth-ed emails, and stuff like that? Because then you will be able to set limits later on as you create your online survey. So these are some of the things that you need to consider before creating an online survey, but it's very crucial when you actual create in actual the survey later on. So now that you have identified your purpose, the structure, and your respondents, now you are now going to make your online survey. So these are the basic steps of how online survey tools work. Usually, like for example, if you're using Google Form or Microsoft Form, how do these online survey tools work? So first is the step one is again, you define survey goals. Kahit naman anong task, whether assessment, teaching, um, research, we always start with defining our goals, right? It's also the same thing with surveys and questionnaires and researches. We need to define our goals. We need to define our purpose. Then the second one is once we define our survey, our goals, we now create our online survey. Okay? And then we are going to share our survey using a link, an email, or we can embed it in our school website. Once we done sharing our survey and the respondents are, and then we are able now to get the responses from our respondents, we can now evaluate their responses. Now, what's nice about using these online survey tools is that they automatically provide charts, graphs that would show and summarize the responses of the respondents. So for example, in Google Form, after the respondents write their response, you can now check the Google form will now generate a chart, for example, a pie chart or a bar graph, depending on the question that you created. So now you will no longer have to do it manually. Unlike when you're sending out hard copies of questionnaires or surveys, once you collect all the responses, the questionnaires with answers, you still have to, make a table and tally the respondents. And then after that, you also need to create your graph or charts manually so you can give a visual representation of your data. But in online survey tools, the platform, the app itself would automatically generate these charts and summaries. Later on, I will show you. And then lastly, of course, as I said earlier, the primarily reason why we conduct online surveys and surveys in general is that we want to improve our processes and take corrective actions to issues and concerns that we experience in our classroom or in our schools, or in this case, that we're in a pandemic, in the delivery of our different learning modalities. So what are these online survey tools? So there are many platforms, but these are the common ones. We have SurveyMonkey, we have Question Pro, we have Google Forms, and Microsoft Forms. So each of these have the same function. You can create different kinds of surveys here and different kinds of online forms. But I think the most popular is Google Forms. Okay, and it's been used by so many already. So now we'll talk about Google Forms. Building let's start with how you can build your survey through Google Forms. By the way, disclaimer, I will no longer give a step-by-step instruction on how you would use Google Forms, because I already did that during the DepEd Tech O'Clock series last summer. I think that was a very I think that was a very comprehensive discussion and demonstration on how to use Google Forms. So if you want to know how to use Google Forms, I've demonstrated it comprehensively during my session on DepEd CDO Tech O'Clock. So you can just replay that one. As I said earlier, you can just replay that one. So as I said earlier, I will just discuss Google Forms in the context of action research for this session. Okay? So building your survey. Again, when you create a survey in Google Forms, this is just the what do you call this area here in Google Forms? Ito lang yung hahanapin niyo parati. This horizontal, ano ba to? Rectangle, something, horizontal shape. And this is where you're going to manipulate your Google form for your online survey. So what are these icons? Number one is the plus sign here with the plus sign inside a circle. This is where you're going to add a question. There are a lot of kinds of questions that you can make in Google Forms, and I will further explain these kinds of questions later. So if you want to add a question, just remember the plus sign. Next is this icon here is import questions. What is import questions? Let's say that last year you already have a survey, and this year you want to create a survey similar to the survey that you have created last year. So what you can do is to import the questions from last year to the form that you are going to create this year, so that you will no longer manually enter the same questions. Okay? So hindi ka na maggagawa ulit ng form from scratch because you already have questions from last year and all you have to do is just import them. Okay, so that is import questions. Next is this T here. It's adding title and description. So this is what you will see at the topmost part of the form. And for for basic research, for research purpose, this is where you're going to describe your research, the purpose of your research, so that when your respondents open the form, they would be able to know what the research is about, what the purpose of the research is, and you can also put here in the description the confidentiality agreement and so on. So all of the things that you need to explain about your research, you can put it in the title and the description part. And next is add image. So there are researches wherein you would require, like for example, a respondent to describe an image or give comments about an image, a picture. So you can add an image here. Also, you can add a video. So if you want your research, for example, your respondents, you want them to watch a video and make comments about your video, probably a reflection of what they have just seen. So you can add a video here. And then lastly, you can add a section. Later, I will explain this why this is one of my most favorite part, one of not really, yeah, one of my favorite parts in Google Forms. So sectioning is basically putting in some parts of your putting in dividing your questions into parts. So for example, you have questions about students profile, so you can put them in one section, and then you have and then the next section would be about your actual research questions. And then you can also have another section for feedback and comments. And then you can also have another section for, let's say, an essay, or a paragraph answer. So you can divide your questions into sections or parts. Later, I will show you some example on how you would be able to use it. Okay, so those are the okay, that is how you navigate, that is how you build your survey. Then the next part is kind of questions you can make and in Google Forms and the charts that it produces. Okay, so what are these? Alright, when you add a question, again, you just click the plus sign inside a circle here, this button here, and when you click that one, you will see a variety of questions that you can make. So you can make a short answer question. Short answer question would require short answer. That means you will only be allowed to enter 140 characters, 140 characters, and that includes spaces and punctuations. So this is fit for questions such as asking the name of the respondent, asking the location of the respondent, for example. So again, this is just 140 characters. While paragraph, of course, it does not have a limit. So this is best if you're asking the opinions, comments, or even essay type of questions. You use the paragraph question. Okay, next is the multiple choice. I'll explain these later. Checkbox, drop down. We have file upload, linear scale, multiple choice grid, checkbox grid, date and time. So I think these are all self-explanatory, but I will be discussing some of these, especially on what charts they generate. But before that, let me just show you the basic interface of Google Forms. So there are two parts in Google Forms. We have questions and responses. So questions, if you click this one, this part here, the top part, this is where you will see your questions and this is where you're going to edit, add, or delete your questions or modify your questions. Now, if you're going to click the Responses tab, this is where you will get summaries, lists, charts and graphs created from the responses of the respondents. So you will see here in my form that I created, there are already 188 responses. And you can see here the chart, the pie chart that it created from one of the questions. And here is also a list of their answers. Okay, so those are just the two basic parts of Google Forms. Okay, so let me begin with short answer. Of course, as I said earlier, for short answer, this would require short answer and it only allows 140 characters. For short answer question, it will not generate any chart or graph, but it will be listed. For example, name of school currently teaching. So all of the answers of the respondents in this question will be listed. Okay? Same with paragraph question. Again, paragraph question, it will not have a limit on the characters, the number of characters that the respondents can answer. And then same with the short answer, it will only have a list of the responses of the respondents. Okay, next is multiple choice. Multiple choice is when you only have one correct answer per question. You use multiple choice if you would only allow one correct answer and you're going to set one correct answer, or if you will only allow one answer per respondent. So example of this is example of a question for a multiple choice in action in research is, for example, the location. Since this is a national level research, so I asked them if they're from Luzon, Visayas, or Mindanao, and the respondents would only be able to answer one. Okay, you will only give multiple choice question if you would ask the respondents to answer only one in each question. And the chart that it would generate is the pie chart. Okay, so from the location, we have here, what's nice about the chart being generated in Google Form is that it's very specific, but it's also very simple and I think elegant. So as you can see here the number of responses. And then from the pie chart, you can see here, if you hover your mouse here, you will see the actual number of respondents who chose Luzon, and then 12 is actually 6.4% of 188 responses. So you will get the actual number and you will also get the percentage. You can also see here the legend of your um, the choices from your multiple choice. And what's nice about it is that you can copy this chart right away without highlighting or anything. You just simply click this box here. If you click that one, you can already copy it and then you can transfer it in a spread in a Word document for your reports or etc. So it's very easy to copy. Again, for multiple choice, the chart that it would generate is a pie chart. And again, you will not manually do this. It's Google Form who will automatically create this using the responses of the respondents, right? Next is the multiple choice grid. The multiple choice grid is similar to multiple choice, but you are categorizing your questions so that you will not have to make the same kind of choices again and again. Okay, so for example here, I have a question, accessibility to equipment. So this is one category. And then under this category, I have several options here. I have several questions. I'm actually asking if the teacher has a headphone, a camera, a flash disk, a computer, microphone, and recorder. And I just put two options here, yes and no. If you're going to do it in a multiple choice of way like this, you would have a very long form. Mataas po yung long form. Taas kayo mong long form. But if you do like this, it's easier for the respondents to answer the question, and also your form will not be too long. Okay? So that's the option that you can do in multiple choice grade. In multiple choice grade, same with multiple choice, you can only answer one for each of the items. So for example, in headphones, you can only check here, choose here, yes or no, and you cannot answer both. You can have another option here if you want to have an option both. Okay, so that's multiple choice grid. And of course, since it's a grid, the chart that it would generate is a bar graph such as this. So you will now see for headphones, if headphones, these are the respondents who answered yes, and these are the respondents who answered no. Again, this is automatically generated by Google Forms, and you can just copy it right away. Okay, another one is checkbox. Checkbox is if you are allowing the respondents to choose two or more responses for each question. Okay, and this is an example of a checkbox grid. So unlike in a multiple choice grid, you only answer one per row. In the checkbox grid, you can answer as many as you can. Okay, it will not matter. This is best when it, for example, your question would be in terms of availability in schedule. Okay, so you can do a checkbox grid, and also it will generate a bar graph similar to multiple choice grid. Okay, for another question that you can create in Google Forms is a scale, and particularly the linear scale. So, diba, we already know that there are a lot of scales in research, but for Google Form, it's the available scale is just the linear scale. But I think this is the most used and helpful to us teachers or who are in working in the education field. So for scale, it will generate a column graph just like this. Okay. So those are the questions that you can make in Google Forms with regards to in the context of your research. Okay, in this part here, this is actually the last part of our session. I'm going to share to you 5 features that you can use for research in Google Forms. So there are actually a lot of features, but I think these 5 are some of the helpful features that you can use when creating online surveys or questionnaires using Google Forms. Okay, let me begin with the first one. The first one is you can make some questions optional. Diba in research, it's very important that we practice ethics. We have such thing as research ethics, and one of which is the confidentiality of our respondents. So there's an option in Google Forms. I know some of you already know this, that you can set questions to be required or not. So for example, the short answer, question, and name, you can turn this off so that the respondents would have the option either to write their name or not. So that is for one feature that you can use for research, especially in terms of ethics and confidentiality. Okay. Number two is set the kind of response you want from your samples. So this is very nice, no? Especially when you're talking about numbers. If your responses are numbers. So how does this help you? So let's say your question you would require your question in your question you would require that the respondents would enter a number. For example, their grade level. Let's say, for example lang, usually multiple choice naman pag grade level. But let's just have that example. So example, grade level. Some respondents would answer in numerical form. Like for example, grade 6, so they would type 6, the number 6. There are also those who would type in Roman numerals. And there are also those who would type in using number words, like they would spell out the name, like 6, SIX, or Roman numerals VI. So if that would happen, there magka-problema in terms of the generation of the charts and summaries, because the Google form would now be confused as to the similarity of data. So for example, if you want your questions, if you want that the Google form would generate accurate accurate chart or graph from the responses of your respondents, you can actually set the kind of response you want. So, for example, here, you can go to the ellipsis button here, these three horizontal dots here, and then you click response validation. Once you click response validation, you can now set the kind of response you want. For example, you would only allow answers that are written in number. And there's also an option here that you can only accept, for example, a number that is less than 10, something like that. Para hindi sila mo go beyond 10. So you can actually set that kind of response. So when the respondent would write a word here or a Roman numeral, the form will not accept the response. It will create an error because the response should be a number. And then you can also write here a description at the below the question that you're only accepting a numerical response, not a number word or a not a Roman numeral. So that's another feature of Google Forms for your in the making of your online surveys for your research. Okay, next is you can set conditions based on response. This is where adding sections come in. Again, when you add a section, you just click this parang two parallel vertical rectangles here. And once you click that one, the sections now will be divided. So you can have section 1 of 2. That means section 1, you can have this as the respondent's profile. And then section 2, you can now have this section as uh, the actual research questions. And then what's nice about it is that you can set the conditions based on response. Di ba remember when you encoded your students in the LIS, there is a question there na, do you have an internet, can you access, something like that, something like this, can you access the internet? And then if you would click yes, there would be another question that will come out. Yung another question is, uh, where can you access the internet? Is it at home? Is it an internet cafe? Is it from the neighbor? Can you access internet from the neighbor? But if you would click no in the question, can you access the internet? That question will not appear. So those are conditions set by the LIS. Now if the respondent, if the teacher would click yes, another question will come in. But if it clicks no, walang question, ano ba tawag niyan? Walang additional question na lalabas. So you can also do that in Google Forms using sections. So for example, I have here a very simple survey. Do you own a smartphone? So if yes, what will happen? If the respondent would answer yes, then the respondent would be able to continue to the next session. Probably because in the next session, the additional question would be, what is your smartphone or what is the brand of your smartphone? So meron na siguro doon mga iPhone, Samsung, Oppo, Huawei, ganyan. But if the respondent would answer no, it will go to section 3, which is about yourself. So, pag no na, wala nga siyang smartphone, so he or she will no longer answer the next question, which is about what what your smartphone brand is. So you can actually set that using sections in Google Forms. So you just have to again click the ellipsis button, the three dots, horizontal dots, and then you go to section based on answer, and then you can set the conditions here on what will happen if they will answer this option and what will happen if they will answer this option. Okay, so that's the third feature of Google Forms that you can use in research. Okay, the next one is set some limit on the respondents. Okay, this is the fourth feature. Number one is you can set some limit on the respondents. First is, for example, if you're using your DepEd account, you can restrict the respondents to only those who have DepEd emails. Okay, so if you want respondents who are public school teachers, set it to those who have deep depth emails. And you can also limit to one response only so that you will not have double entries later on. Kasi pag mag-double entries yan, the Google form will still count it in the generation of the charts and the graphs and the summaries. So you can just limit it to one response. Another way to limit on the respondents is the use of an add-on called Form Limiter. Okay, you can access it in the add-ons button here, which looks like a puzzle piece just near the send button at the top right part of your screen. So if you click the Form Limiter, but you have to install this first, ha? You have to install this first. Okay, if you click the form limiter, it will open a new window here. And these are some of the things that you can limit in your Google Forms. Number one is date and time. What do you mean by date and time? That means if you set, for example, December 18, 12 midnight. That means when December 18, 12 midnight comes, the form will automatically close and will no longer be accessed by anybody. Okay? So, for example, ang limit lang talaga is 1 week lang ang pagkuha ng responses. You can actually set the date and time that the form will automatically close. The second is number of form responses. For example, di ba in our researches, we always set beforehand the number of respondents that we're going to get. So, for example, if you want 200 respondents, you can set it in form limiter in such a way that when the form receives 200 responses, it will also automatically close the form. So di ka na ma-confuse na, hala, nga niabot naman ni 205 or 210. Because once it reaches 200, it will automatically close by itself. Okay, so again, this is where you will set it. And then, of course, you can also set it according to spreadsheet value. So those are some of the ways to limit the responses of the respondents. And lastly, the last feature that I'm going to share to you is the printing of the individual responses of your respondents. So, 'di ba, in our researches, we even if we're doing it online, we still some institutions and even our schools and our offices would require us to submit hard copies of our researches. And sometimes we would say na, ay, mag-hard copy man, so ako mag-hard copy na lang po ko questionnaire para dali ra ang ma-attach. No, because in the online survey using Google Forms or any survey forms, online survey platforms for that matter, you can actually print the individual responses of your respondents. So from the responses tab, you will have your summary. This is where you will see the charts, the graphs, and the lists generated by Google form based from the respondents' answers. Then you will also see here the responses of your respondents per question. And then you can, in here in individual, this is the individual responses of the respondents. So if you would click this one, the number one here is the number one respondent, and so on and so forth. And now you can print this one and attach it to your as an appendix of your researches. So basically that's it. That's very simple and that's very easy. So those are the 5 features that you can make use in Google Forms that is very helpful in your doing your researches. And lastly, to share your survey again, you can email it. You can type in the email addresses of your respondents here. Second is you can generate a link and share it to your friends, to your colleagues, to your respondents, and you can even share it right away to Facebook and Twitter. Lastly, you can embed your Google form, your survey to your school website or any website for that matter. So for example, if you would create an online enrollment form, all you have to do is to embed this in your school website, and students and parents can just go to the website and answer the form, and it will forever be there. The form will be there forever. um Dili bitaw parayaan ng individual link sa imong hatag. Ang tendency is malimtan na kung sa tunga link, asa to na link. But if you are going to embed your survey forms, but just like this, on your website. So let's just say this is a school website, and you're going to embed your survey form, your Google form here. It will be there forever. So you will not lose the link, you will not lose your form. As long as you only have like a website or a social media page for your school or for your class or for yourself as a teacher. So I would really, actually that's the end of my presentation. I would really love to have a Q&A, but since this is a recorded video, just feel free to message me on Facebook or on my Facebook page, The Public School Teacher, and I would gladly help you out and reply to your queries and questions regarding the topic today. Thank you so much again for inviting me, and I hope to see you again soon, and hopefully in a face-to-face setup and no longer virtual. Virtual hugs to everybody. Bye-bye.